here for the last week. We all recall some of it fondly. And I'd like to ask for your thoughts and recollections on the significance of those events, what has transpired since then up to the present time, and what you would most like to remember, and perhaps also where you felt we didn't quite make the grade. So in whatever form you like to, please proceed.
Well, Senator Mitchell, George, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and particularly to be here with these three people. George, without your work in the run-up to that negotiation 20 years ago, we frankly would never have had anything to negotiate about. So thank you for that. To Bertie Ahern, the Taoiseach, I recall during the whole of that negotiation his total dedication. Even when he had a personal bereavement, he came and he gave his time and his effort and his intelligence and his energy to finding peace. And also to President Clinton, who we're delighted to see here, because he was the call a friend during the course of the negotiation. I mean, when anything got really, really difficult, we'd pick up the phone and ask him to help. And I do remember at one point, because as the days went on, you became slightly disoriented with the negotiation, saying to my folk, "They are 5 hours ahead over there." I said, "No, they're 5 hours behind." So that was 3 o'clock in the morning, but he was up and alive and willing to give us the benefit of his advice. So I would like to give some brief opening remarks in this way. For me, this began personally in my own childhood when I was growing up, when we used to spend every summer in Donegal. And when I remember as the Troubles began in the late 60s, my family that used to have close relationships, although they were from a Protestant background with their Catholic neighbors, how as those Troubles began, those relationships soured. And then we entered into this period of hatred and bitterness and division and terrorism and sectarianism, which then lasted for many, many years. And so those of us who used to remember what things were like before the Troubles and then remember the Troubles, remember what a terrible period it was. And I remember when we came to power in May 1997, at that point, the ceasefire that John Major had put together with a lot of wisdom and energy had broken down. And I actually remember the very first speech that I made as Prime Minister was here in Northern Ireland, really to the Unionist community. And so we began what was almost a year lead-in to that Good Friday negotiation. But even when we got to the negotiation, it was very touch and go as to whether anything was going to happen at all. I remember you and I discussing that at the time, George, and thinking it looked pretty hopeless. But then over the days that followed, we managed to put this together. And we put it together not because of the work that we did, but because there were political leaders in Northern Ireland who were prepared to make real sacrifices and show real courage in the search for peace. But the important thing is this: when we reached that agreement and then announced it, that was the beginning. And I think this is really important in the context of today. We didn't conclude the Good Friday Agreement and then everything was gentle and easy and comfortable. On the contrary, then over the next 9 years, I remember sometimes every month, sometimes every week, sometimes every day, we were working at it again. And we were going back and having meetings, sometimes short meetings, sometimes long meetings. And we were dealing with the new police service in Northern Ireland. We were dealing with decommissioning. We were dealing with criminal justice matters, with cultural matters. And my point is, when we then came to that moment in May 2007, when the executive came up and running, and the extraordinary sight of Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley sitting down together, that was the culmination of a long
Okay, coming back in and out of this debate for you throughout the afternoon, leaving the former Prime Minister there just when I want to hear from Bill Clinton in the fullness of time. Also want to talk about Syria. Prime Minister under pressure to take action after France and the US vowed to retaliate against the Assad regime following a suspected chemical attack. Joined by Johnny Mercer, Conservative MP and former serviceman. Hello to you, Mr Mercer. Thanks for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Just before we talk about Syria, quick thought on Good Friday Agreement. 20 years ago it was signed.
I know, it's extraordinary and amazing that that amount of time has passed. And, you know, it's clearly, you'll have its critics, and some people will think it's held, and and some people think it's won't. But I think, you know, it has fundamentally shifted the dial of what living in Northern Ireland means for a whole generation of young people. And it's extraordinary to think it's 20 years, and it's great to hear all the protagonists there really sort of recounting it. It's fascinating.
Shifting the dial on living in Syria, of course, was, some people would say, our lack of intervention by the British Parliament when the Americans came to us to say, come with us on this. You wrote about that, didn't you, in the paper this week? Not at all impressed by that decision by the British government. No,
I mean, you know, I feel desperately for David Cameron, for George Osborne and everyone involved in it. I think at the time I said I thought it would be perhaps the most profound foreign policy mistake we've made in the last decade, but I think it's probably going to be longer than that. So I think clearly, look, everybody understands the hangover from Iraq and the mistakes were made, but we kind of, you know, we learn from that. We change, we establish a National Security Council, we make sure we never repeat their mistakes again, but it certainly doesn't mean we become a little Britain that just retreats and has this sort of insular view of itself. Our friends and our allies expect us to play a role. It's certainly concerning that France and the US, you know, they're very strong on this, and we haven't really said we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with them yet. I hope that's going to come out. This is, you know, sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in and what you think is right, and this is a clear moment for that. William Hague has said again today in the Telegraph, you know, this is our moment. Sometimes you have to step up to the plate, and no one's calling for full-scale military invasion. You know, war doesn't work like that anymore. But we cannot stand by and let this sort of thing happen.
Who do you blame for our previous lack of intervention?
Well, I think we're all to blame in a way. I mean, certainly coming from the services, you sort of look on in amusement at some of the debates that go on and the detail that goes on. But if you look at the fundamental principle of Parliament having a say on foreign security issues, those decisions are made in full picture of all the intelligence that is never going to be revealed to Parliament, that is never going to be revealed to the public, because you'll burn your sources, and the way you